would like to instead. But the first 9 chapters have been cajoling and invitations and challenges in every single way that Solomon could do so to get his son and all of us to pursue wisdom. And as I thought about the concept of pursuing wisdom and how prone we are to not pursue wisdom, I started to understand why it took 9 chapters. It takes 9 chapters because we're probably that slow. And if you're here tonight and you're maybe still thinking, I haven't caught the bug, or the light hasn't turned on for me yet, then that is part of the reason why he spent such a long time trying to get your attention this way and that way and every other way that you need to pursue wisdom. You know, we all know people who have made bad choices, including myself and you, including yourself. And we make those choices and we learn from them and we make right turns. But we also know people who make bad choices and they never recover. They never turn around and they never recognize that that was dumb or that was silly or that was foolish or that was stupid, whatever the case would be along the way. And we would say something tonight based on Proverbs 9, which is, as we see the invitation to come and hear wisdom, it's for everyone at every stage of life, in every single situation. And if at any moment in your life, even if you're down in the dumps and you're at the bottom and you find yourself in prison or some other challenge and you're very sad that you embezzled and stole and committed murder and whatever the case would be, and you add to the list of things that would make your life miserable, if at that moment you turn around and do what this chapter says, you will be blessed and you will be the better for it. And so I've entitled the sermon tonight, Come to the Banquet. Come to the banquet and receive the wisdom that is being offered to you. I'm not going to read it yet because I want to give you a minute to think about it before I even talk about it. The problem with Western, modern Americans, not even just Christians, is we have everything we need. We're never hungry. We're never at a loss of food. There is never anything that if you wanted it, if you wanted Chinese, if you wanted Italian, if you wanted pizza, if you wanted hamburgers, if you wanted steak, you can have all of them any day of the week, and you can have them morning, noon, and night. I love chili, which is a crazy thing. And I figured out that the night owl will serve breakfast chili, and I love to get a chili omelet, and people look at me like that's the strangest thing in the world. But if it's what a person wants, there it is. No problem in any sense. But if you lived in a culture where you almost never had meat, where you almost never had a time of great excitement, where you would put on a Thanksgiving dinner where you could have anything you wanted, that it was a rare treat that would happen once in your life. Just think of the parable of the son who came home. The father killed the fatted calf. What did that imply? That implied that maybe for a year or 2 or 3, they did not have steak. They didn't have Whoppers. They didn't have hamburgers. They didn't have whatever else was there. That special animal was for something that was very special. And so because we read tonight about a banquet in which a person is invited to come and enjoy this wonderful banquet, we go, big deal, we had a wonderful banquet on Friday. And it doesn't mean anything to us. But if we lived in this culture where a banquet was so unusual and so glorious, it would catch our attention. And this is what I want you to learn. When we are invited to come and listen to wisdom, this is something super. This is something great. This is something unusual, and you can have it all. You can have it. It's there, even though it's so rare. It can be yours if you simply listen to the host who goes out and invites people to come to her banquet. She sends out her servants and pleads with everyone to come to the banquet. Here we go. Proverbs chapter 9, Solomon's ultimate invitation for wisdom. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her meat. She has mixed her wine. She has also furnished her table. She has sent out her maidens, and she cries from the highest places of the city. So she did all the cooking. This would be like Reuben and Jake and Heather doing all of the cooking, and then go standing out in the street yelling at every car that goes by, "Come on in to our dinner." Verse 4, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And as for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, "Come, eat of my bread, drink of the wine that I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of understanding." He who corrects a scoffer gets shame for himself, and he who rebukes a wicked man only harms himself. Do not correct a scoffer, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. He will be still wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in wisdom. And then verse 10 is the last verse I will read in this chapter. And I will remind you that verse 10, it's mentioned the fear of the Lord in several circumstances. This is the theme of the book, and this is the meal. This is what you need to come and partake of to enjoy the banquet that Lady Wisdom has provided for you. Proverbs 9 and verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Pray with me together, and we'll look through it tonight one last time in Proverbs chapter 9. We do thank you, Father, for this evening and for your love and grace, and we thank you for the wisdom that Solomon had. We could wish that he would have acted upon the things that he had discussed, and thank you that you had given him wisdom. But I pray that you would help us tonight, Lord, that we would not only discern or perceive that which is right, but that we would live in such a way that we would practically put it into place in our lives, so that we would be the kind of person who would enjoy the kind of banquet in life, that our life would be so rich and full and satisfied and joyful because we have come to the table of wisdom and we have partaken of it. I pray that the opposite warning would also be heard, which is, if we refuse to come and eat at this table, we will be left digging for and picking the scraps out of the garbage in the way that we live our lives, and will not have the joy and the blessing and the gratitude and the sweetness that you have intended. So I pray that maybe one more time you would help us to say, I will, by God's grace, pursue wisdom in my life. Make it true tonight, and we thank you for it, and we ask it in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen. In Proverbs chapter 7 and in chapter 5, actually also, Lady Wisdom is described and is contrasted with the lady harlot. And so there is a harlot in chapter 7 who is trying to entice men, because this book is written to a young man, to a boy, Solomon's son, to entice them to live in immorality. And Lady Wisdom, on the other side of the coin, is trying to entice them to live a morally upright and good and virtuous life. And so we see that contrast between Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom. And now Lady Wisdom in chapter 9 puts on one more apron, if you will, one more costume, one more way that she will attract people to come and pursue her wisdom. She is no longer just an attractive, beautiful woman who wants people to come in and learn from her in that way. She is now a gracious host who has spent a great deal of time trying to make something wonderful to bless people so that they could come and enjoy the wisdom that she has. And so this gracious host is being described here as wisdom, and this gracious host wants you to come and not just be there, but enjoy the life and the wisdom and the goodness that ought to be there in your life. I am absolutely convinced, I hope that you're convinced, that the way of the transgressor is what? Remember that? The way of the transgressor is hard. It's difficult. It is not delightful. It is miserable. But if you can live in God's ways and walk in His wisdom, you will have joy and delight every single day of your life, no matter what. What's striking, by the way, about wisdom in the Old Testament is that it's different than the law. The law in the Old Testament said, don't do sin, it is wicked, it will be punished. The prophets and the priests came along and they would say, don't do sin because it is evil and it is vile and you'll get shame upon yourself. Wisdom comes along and says, don't commit sin, don't live in sin because it's wild, crazy, stupid. You're like, you don't want to be that guy. You've heard me say that, trying to say that in as many different contexts as is possible. Don't be that guy. We know people, men and women, who make bad choices and never turn around and never recognize that today could be the first day of walking with God, and they go further and further from the sunrise until the sunset. And so wisdom here, again, this host, first of all, she puts everything together. And I want you to think about that for a minute. If you're to put on a banquet, especially a banquet in the Middle East, that was a very rare occurrence. They would have banquets usually at weddings or when people were betrothed. They would have a wedding they'd have a banquet at a circumcision. I hope I said that right. A banquet at a wedding, a banquet at a circumcision, a feast in some of the sacrifices in the Old Testament, and that was about it. And if there was a wedding feast, it could go for 1 day or 2 days or 7 days, and it would be the kind of time you would never forget for the rest of your life. And so by putting the invitation for you to pursue wisdom in that picture is reminding you something really, really important about wisdom. Just as you don't wake up in the morning, a host or a cook, and say, I think I'm going to throw a huge banquet this afternoon and get it all done and put it all there together and then bring people in, so you don't develop wisdom in one afternoon. If you're to have a banquet, you have to go and buy the cow. You might raise the cow, the fatted calf again, if you will. You might have to send people to other locations and other stores and other places, and you would begin to collect the things that were necessary for there to be a wonderful banquet. By the way, these banquets, when they would occur, they would be served with meat and with mixed wine, with table furnishings, and they would have all kinds of bread. Bread is always the staple of everything. And if they were really rich and they really wanted to put on the nines, they might have pigeon and geese, doesn't it sound good, and duck and oxen, and sheep and fish. Maybe once in their life they would do this together. And they might be able to gather raisins and dates and figs and melons and grapes and apples and watermelons and pomegranates and mulberries and lettuce and cucumbers and chickpeas and olives and other things like that along the way. And so you don't put that menu together in one afternoon. And the same thing is true in the pursuit of wisdom. I don't gain God's kind of wisdom by getting up on Friday and saying, it's now time to go. It takes a lifetime of effort, a lifetime of seeking, a lifetime of determination to gain the wisdom that is necessary to give me the kind of joy that God intends for me to have. The fact that she goes out into the open courts and she goes to the streets and everywhere and is calling for people, it should remind you of the other woman that we saw in chapter 7. The immoral woman did the same thing. And so maybe as you're walking down the street, on the left side of the street, you might see the immoral woman walking by, trying to entice people to come to her quote-unquote banquet. And then you would have this here Lady Wisdom on the other side saying, don't listen to her, listen to me along the way. And so as she would go out, it teaches us something about wisdom. And here's what it is. The fact that wisdom is looking for you, the fact that wisdom is calling your name, The fact that wisdom is searching for you, that wisdom is in the streets and is sending her maidens out into the streets to look for you, tells me that wisdom is not just for the rich, wisdom is not just for the elderly, it's not just for the honorable, but wisdom is for you at any age and at any point in your life right now. Now is the time for you to say, I will pursue the wisdom of God. It isn't like you have to have some credentials, you have to have something special. You could be 4 years old, you could be 14 years old, you could be 24, 34, or any other degree of age. Wisdom is looking for you and telling you that you can live a better life. You might say it's 70. I don't know if there's anybody here 70 or not tonight. There might be one or two of us. You might say at 70, I don't need any more wisdom. But if you're 70 and you've walked with God and you've lived a holy life and have done well and whatever the case would be, you still have opportunities to influence young people like myself, young people like the others in the room. You still have opportunities to pray and be a light and make a difference and help your children. And what is it that old people, elderly people, I should say, almost always, if you talk to them and you want their face to light up, you ask them about their grandchildren, right? The guy pulls out his wallet and all of the pictures come out. Let me show you my grandchildren. We all go, oh no, I don't want to see 17 pictures of your grandchildren. Those grandchildren need your wisdom. And you can get more wisdom, and you ought to pursue a greater wisdom, if not for yourself, because you think you're almost there, but for these other people along the way. And if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you're not 78 or 89 and you're only 10 or 5 or 12 or whatever the case would be, that wisdom is still there exactly for you at the same time. Second thing that I think is rather significant about this wisdom, as Lady Wisdom is putting on her banquet and is encouraging you to come to her banquet, is notice how grand and glorious it is. It says in the text that she has hewn out 7 pillars. And you go, that's no big deal. I've got at least 8 or 10 beams in my house, or whatever the case is. We don't even count a house by the pillars. But if you look at the Washington or the Lincoln Memorial, or you look at other houses along the way, and often the houses are identified by the nobility of the person, by the number of pillars that would be on the outside. Sometimes the pillars didn't even hold anything up. They would just be there and you'd walk through them. And if you think of some of the ancient pagan temples, all these lines of pillars, and even Solomon's temple had the 2 pillars. And notice that there were only 2 pillars out in front of Solomon's temple, and their names are given, and they don't come to me right now. I think it was Jabin and some other name, signifying grandeur. And so this house has how many pillars? Not just 2, not just a few, but she put up 7 pillars so that everyone would know that this is important. She's collected her food, she's collected her things, and she invites you to come. Now, I want you to stop and think about why it is that wisdom is being described, and I'm almost feeling a little bit redundant, but I'm trying to make it as clear and as helpful for you as is possible. The point of it being a banquet is this. If you pursue wisdom, this is like I'm outside of the metaphor. It's talking in real terms. If you pursue wisdom, you will receive things that you didn't earn. If you pursue wisdom, you get to partake of things that you don't deserve. If you pursue wisdom, you will be given gracious gifts that you didn't work for, or to go back in the metaphor, you didn't cook it, you didn't grow it, you didn't slice it, you didn't bake it, you didn't season it, you didn't do anything to it, but you get to enjoy all of the fruits of somebody's good cooking. And what the Lord is saying in that analogy is, if you pursue godly wisdom, the Lord will give you things that you didn't deserve, that you don't earn, that will be a benefit and joy to you that you will be able to take with you for the rest of your life. So in other words, the point is by pursuing godly wisdom, by walking in God's ways, He is telling you, your life will be full of joy. It will be easier. It will be blessed. God will make sure that He, in His kindness, gives you the things that you need in life. And so in other words, the way one person put it, pleasure and joy are set before you, or misery and hunger. And if pleasure and joy is set before you as you choose wisdom, then you can be sure that here are a few things that will probably not happen to you if you pursue wisdom. If you come to the banquet, which is pursuing wisdom, you probably won't commit immorality. You probably won't fall into more immorality. You probably won't get divorced. You probably won't cheat on your taxes. I doubt you'll go to prison. You probably won't get in a wreck because you're drunk or get hooked on pornography or on drugs or on gambling or even on food. You probably won't get hooked on sports betting or social media. You probably won't have children that grow up to hate you and rebel against you and reject you. You probably won't go to jail and have to be in rehabilitation. You probably won't do time in the big house. You probably won't go bankrupt. You probably won't lose your house. You probably won't lose your car. You probably won't live an unhappy life. And I use the word probably because things happen all along the way, and our lives are sometimes rather messy. But these are the things that we will avoid if we choose to come and eat at wisdom's table. And if you do, you will probably, in fact, I'm going to say this one better, you will certainly enjoy your life more. You will certainly be healthier, and you will most likely stay out of jail and out of trouble. You will certainly have a deeper love for your family. You will much more likely live long enough to see your grandchildren. And you will certainly be a solid member of society, a solid member of the church, helpful to other people. You will be loved by other people if you come and eat at this banquet. You will impact the world in ways you could never imagine, and you will know the best that God has for you if you determine and choose to come eat at the banquet of wisdom. In the Old Testament and other times, banquets were rather great social events, and one of the things that they did at a banquet that was not common today is the order of seating indicated something. And so you might walk around the table and you might look for your name tags. We often do that. You could understand that. And the closer you got to sit to the host or to the family or to the person who was the honorary guest, the more important you felt. And so you wanted to be moved up. And in fact, Jesus told a parable about that, or gave an analogy, didn't he? He said, when you go to a feast, don't go sit in the front of the room. Don't go sit right by the host, but you go sit in the back corner. And if you're in the back corner and no one notices you, that's okay. Just stay there. But if the host sees you and says, friend, what are you doing way back there? And says, you come up a little closer, then you will have honor before others. That is the point of what wisdom is doing. Wisdom is inviting people to come to her feast, to her banquet, and she wants you to have the honored seat in her banquet. And so I would encourage you to consider the importance of doing something like that. Why does it matter along the way, by the way, that we would pursue wisdom? Because a lot of people do a lot of crazy things in a lot of different ways. Even in ministries. I want to share a couple of ministries that literally, if they would have been more wise, would not be in this situation. The Baptist Foundation of Arizona is a ministry group, and as they were trying to get people to give money to them, it was found out a little bit later that someone within the system was crooked, and it proved to be, in the end, one of the most bold, fraudulent schemes ever on record. They ultimately filed for bankruptcy, and thousands of elderly people lost all of their life savings. I don't know if you ever follow the Southern Baptists. They're the biggest evangelical denomination, I think, in the world at this time. So what happens to them is rather significant. People have been noticing that they've been giving lots and lots of money to the North American, mission board, and yet they're planting fewer churches and sending out fewer people, and they're wanting to know where is the money going. And so for the last 2 years, there have been these battles. Open up your books. Tell us where the money is going. And they pull all kinds of shenanigans, and so far no one knows whether or not that the mission board is the most fraudulent or if it's a good organization. I'm old enough to remember, in fact, I had relatives who were in the Evangelical Baptist missions. Some of you might have even known some of that group. In the early 2000s, they went bankrupt because the people at the top were inept and unable to properly run the system. When I was in college, it would have been about 1984, 1985, 1986, right in that region, BMNA, Baptist Missions of North America, went bankrupt. And I remember being in churches, and here's how this one was. We're trying to help missionaries and plant churches. We want you to come buy bonds from us. We'll buy the bonds, and you can invest, and we'll pay you interest. That will plant churches. And then whenever you want to cash out your bonds, you can, and then it will be, your money will be used for God's glory, and you'll make some money on the side. And it proved just to be, I think in the end, a Ponzi scheme. Stole lots and lots of money from a lot of people who probably didn't have enough wisdom to know better. It's not just criminals that fall into bad ideas and make bad choices, but it is characteristic of them, isn't it? I love stories like this, and I got to give you a couple because I think it helps in the evening. Criminals obviously make bad choices and don't listen to wisdom. If they would come to wisdom's banquet, they would not have been here. Consider Leland Dolente and Hillard Sward, S-W-A-R-D. They were driving their car from California to Montana, and they had some marijuana in the car and some other things, and they were feeling rather paranoid about what was going on. And as they crossed from the border from one state to another, they noticed that a car was following them. And they would drive faster, and that car would drive faster, and they would drive slower, and the car would drive slower. So they got on their phone, and they called the police, and they said, "We know you're following us because we have marijuana in our car, but we want you to quit it." And so the dispatch person dutifully found out, well, where is it that we're following you, or what's going on? And they gave them the route and the place. And of course, the police promptly went to the location and found them and arrested them. Another really dumb scenario, Timothy Chapek, he broke into a Portland home, and he decided that while he was there, he would take a shower. The people weren't home. They didn't need a shower at that moment. About halfway through the shower, he heard some noises in the house and recognized that the homeowners apparently had returned home. So he locked the door in the bathroom and was hiding in there, and he got so scared that maybe they would have a gun that he got out his phone, and he called the police, and he says, "Please come and rescue me from these homeowners who I think are probably going to shoot me." And so the police came and arrested him and took him out of the house. That's not as bad as what Jesse did. Jesse Burub tried at one time to rob a local bar. And it was a bar that he loved to frequent often. And so he went to the bar, and instead of going through the door like a normal bank robber would, or a robber, he decided to jump down through the chimney without investigating the size or the location of the chimney. And it had a 90-degree angle, and of course he went halfway and landed there per-plunk in this chimney. And to his good fortune, he was able to get into his pocket and get out his phone and call the fire department to come and dig him out of the chimney in the bar. Tristan and Derek were a couple of people. They were driving recklessly in Southern California. And as they were driving through the area, somebody noticed there must be something wrong with them. And so the police started chasing them, following them, because they had several things in their car that they knew were illegal and would get them arrested. They drove off into a country road and ran out into the woods. Well, as they were able to hide in the woods, no one was able to find them. Darkness began to set. Now, I would remind you, this is Southern California, where they were. But they became afraid that they were going to freeze to death. And so they called the police and begged for them to come rescue them and find them because they were freezing in the woods. Last story, just so you can think about how foolish it is not to follow wisdom. Christopher Moore broke into a home, and he was taking things and filling up his burglar sack along the way. And all of a sudden, one of the homeowners woke up. There were people in the house at the time. And the homeowner grabbed his gun and chased him out the door. And as they went out the door, he got in his car and started to drive away. And the homeowner jumped in the car with him, with the gun, and was pointing it at him as he sped away. He finally went down the road a little ways and stopped his car, called the police and said, "There's a guy pointing a gun at me. Can you come and rescue me?" And so the police came and took over pointing guns at him and took him away to prison because he was an absolute fool. The point in all of those, and I say it a little bit to enjoy the time, is simply this, that it is stupid and foolish not to follow and receive the invitation of wisdom. Going back in the text a little bit, there is a warning that comes to us in verses 8 and 9, and I want to focus on those because the warnings that are given here, I'm going to call it a veiled warning. They're actually encouragements for you not to do this. Again, in many different circumstances, we are reminded of the same thing. Don't be the guy who doesn't listen. Don't be the girl who doesn't receive wisdom. If someone wants to tell you something, even if you think you're smarter than they are or you know more than they do, listen to them. And so the warning in verse 8 is, do not correct a scoffer, lest he hate you. The point is, if someone is giving you some insight, things like that, you shouldn't turn around and hate them. I don't want to be known as a scoffer. In the second part of the verse, the warning is, or the encouragement, rebuke a wise man and he will love you. How do you know whether or not you're a wise man or a scoffer? Well, the verse tells me the difference. If every time someone tells me something, I argue with them, I plug my ears, I don't accept it, then I am not a wise man or not a wise woman. If every time someone tells me something, I scoff at them, then this is the person whom I am. But if I love it, notice the point. What does a wise man do? Rebuke a wise man? It is not just that he'll listen to you, but he will love you. If you find yourself being grateful for other friends and neighbors and family who will tell you the truth, and you don't rebuke them and you don't scoff at them, then you could know that you're already eating at this table. You're already that person who is receiving insight and instruction. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be wiser still. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. So you want to be a person who increases in learning and knowledge, then be the person who lives and listens, who listens to other people. And then we come to, and I'm saying it like this because I think it is so important for you not to miss in all that we're talking about what is the theme of the book of Proverbs, what is being served at the meal at the table, what is the one item, the one dish, the one thing on the menu that will make your life better, and it is the bullseye of verse 10. So here it is. The gracious host says, this is what's for supper. This is what's good. This is what will satisfy you. This is what will make your life better. This is what will keep you out of prison. This is what will be a blessing to you and make life joyful and satisfying. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The term the fear of the Lord is used in chapter 1, verse 7. It's used again in chapter 2 a couple of more times, but it is not insignificant, or it is very important to say, why is it not really focused on, like a major point, until here? And because I think you've listened to me a little bit tonight, you can say, now I know why the fear of the Lord in this main verse, chapter 9, verse 10, is here. because this is the conclusion. This is the ultimate invitation. This is the end of Solomon's cajoling his son to listen to wisdom. And he says, you want to walk through that door? This is the door that you need to walk through. This is the foundation of life. This is the thing that will make it all better. And so I'm going to say it like this, that this is the bullseye that will indicate whether or not your life is happy or sad, whether or not it makes sense or it doesn't, whether or not you have the joys that God desires to give to you or you don't, whether or not you are pleasing in God's sight or not. It is simply learning to fear the Lord. It's interesting that when people describe the fear of the Lord, I hear a lot of different people say a lot of different things. And I'll have to be honest that in every one of them I go, well, maybe that's it. And then I listen to another and talk about it and I say, well, maybe that's it, or that was well said. And I think everyone would acknowledge that the concept of the fear of the Lord is almost mysterious. To be a God-fearer is a worshiper. It is certainly a person who recognizes the existence of God. But to be a God-fearer probably plays itself out, I think, in two ways. There is the concept of craven fear or servile fear, if you're familiar with that. There are certain things in life you ought to be afraid of. If you're on the wrong side of the cage or on the inside of the cage of the lion, you ought to be afraid. If you're on the outside of the cage, you can have respect, but it's still that same notion. And the point is, when wisdom is talking, she is reminding us here that God is holy. God is so holy and so awesome in what he does that we should remember, even if he doesn't always treat us this way, that this is who he is. And so the initial element, not all of it, but the initial element of fearing God is remembering that he was the one who cast out Satan and his angels when they rebelled. He was the one who pronounced death on Adam and Eve when they sinned. He was the one who flooded the earth with the flood because the earth was wicked. He was the one who confused the languages so that people wouldn't fall into more grievous sin. That this God was the one who burned Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, overthrew Egypt, destroyed Pharaoh, sent in fiery serpents, had the ground swallow Korah whole, required the death of Achan for stealing that which was under the ban in Jericho. This is the God who struck Uzzah dead for touching the ark. This is the God who killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers because they were encamped around the armies of Israel. This is the God who rained down fire on soldiers who came to arrest Elijah, who required the death of men and women from the land of Canaan who refused to turn to the Lord, required the death of sheep and lambs and oxen and goats because of the sins of people. This is the God who struck Ananias and Sapphira dead, and that's in the New Testament, for lying to the Holy Spirit. And this is the God who premeditatedly planned for the death of his only son, his own son, because sin is bad. And that's the God we're talking about. And that's not all that he is, and I wouldn't want to leave it there. I would be really remiss if that's all I said tonight, that you ought to think of him as a terrible person. I don't want you to think of God as a terrible person in any sense, but I do want you to remember who he is, and that initially, when I read that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, fearing God because he is holy, knowing that he judges sin, will keep me from doing those kinds of things. But it's more than that. It's more than fearing him as a person would fear a rifle when you're looking down the barrel. I always like that illustration. It makes the most sense to me. If I handed you a weapon, a rifle or a gun, depending on whether you're looking at from the barrel end or the butt end of the gun, you have a different kind of reaction. You fear it if it's looking at you from the hot end, but if you hold it in the other side, you still have a respect for it. You know what it is capable of and what it is. And so as we come to the Lord, even if we are his children, we ought to look at him and say, I don't think you're going to burn me like you did Sodom and Gomorrah. You won't. I don't think that you're going to treat me like you did the people before the flood. You won't. He won't do those things. But I have come to see, and I really do believe, that you are an awesome and a holy and a wonderful God. And so, yes, God is to be feared because of what he is capable of, but he is also to be feared because of the goodness of his personage, because he is so great. Knowing that he is holy keeps me on the right side of the law, if you will. But knowing that he is good and gracious keeps me to the place where I want to please him. And so I would boil it down to just a couple of things, and then I'll be done for tonight. This banquet that wisdom invites us to come to is a banquet where the thing that is being served is the fear of the Lord. That is what is there. It is the foundation, it is the ground, it is the root of wisdom. And here's what I need to do. I need to be mindful of his presence and mindful of his promises. Like, yeah, he's always watching. And even if he probably won't strike me dead, I don't think he will. I could tell you stories where I think God has struck people dead, by the way. But even if that is not the case, in which God won't strike me dead, because he is holy, because he is good, because he is gracious, because he's always watching my life, I want to do everything I can to please him. And that is also having the proper fear of the Lord. And if you have that, you'll walk through the doors, you'll sit at the banquet, and God will bless your life. So thankful for the encouragements and the wisdom from God. I hope that you found it tonight. Maybe insightful, maybe in a new way. I at least hope, by the way, I hope that when you read the book of Proverbs, when you get to chapter 9, you go, oh, at least I get it. And then the Lord can work in your heart to draw you into a deeper understanding of the gracious food he wants to give his children. How much he wants to bless you and encourage you and feed you and cause you to have all the joy that a person would have as if they were going to the greatest banquet ever put on for human race. I do thank you, Father, for the night and for your love and for this chapter. I pray that it would do its work in our hearts. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about what's true. And I pray that you would work in our hearts, that we would be passionate to want to live a life that is always pleasing to you, knowing that your presence is always here and you're always watching. Give us, Lord, the strength to walk through the doors and to join you, in that banquet. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. And I would say, go put it into practice.